Hey everybody, what's up? Welcome back to People's Historian. I'm Jason Kishinev. Each episode we read about 30 minutes of history together. Currently reading chapter 15 of Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. And we left off with Franklin Delano Roosevelt just getting elected. So let's dig in. The Roosevelt reforms went far beyond previous legislation. They had to meet two pressing needs: to reorganize capitalism in such a way to overcome the crisis and stabilize the system, also to head off the alarming growth of spontaneous rebellion in the early years of the Roosevelt administration, organization of tenants and the unemployed, movements of self-help, general strikes in several cities. That first objective, to stabilize the system for its own protection, was most obvious in the major law of Roosevelt's first months in office, the National Recovery Act, NRA. Different NRA, obviously. It was designed to take control of the economy through a series of codes agreed on by management, labor, and the government, fixing prices and wages, limiting competition. From the first, the NRA was dominated by big businesses and served their interests. As Bernard Bellish says, its Title I turned much of the nation's power over to highly organized, well-financed trade associations and industrial combines. The unorganized public, otherwise known as the consumer, that means you, along with the members of the fledgling trade union movement, had virtually nothing to say about the initial organization of the National Recovery Administration or the formulation of basic policy. Where organized labor was strong, Roosevelt moved to make some concessions to working people, but where organized labor was weak, Roosevelt was unprepared to withstand the pressures of industrial spokesmen to control the NRA codes. Barston Bernstein confirms this. Despite the annoyance of some big businessmen with Section 7A, the NRA reaffirmed and consolidated their power. Bellish sums up his view of the NRA. The White House permitted the National Association of Manufacturers, the Chamber of Commerce, and allied business and trade associations to assume overriding authority. Indeed, private administration became public administration, and private government became public government, ensuring the marriage of capitalism with statism. When the Supreme Court in 1935 declared the NRA unconstitutional, it claimed it gave too much power to the president. But according to Bellish, FDR surrendered an inordinate share of the power of government through the NRA to industrial spokesmen throughout the country. Also passed in the first months of the new administration, the AAA, Agricultural Adjustment Administration, was an attempt to organize agriculture. It favored the larger farmers as the NRA favored big business. Kind of goes against what people know about FDR, doesn't it? The TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, man, I'm sick of the abbreviations already. The TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, was an unusual entrance of government into business. A government-owned network of dams and hydroelectric plants to control floods and produce electric power in the Tennessee Valley. It gave jobs to the unemployed, helped the consumer with lower electric rates, and in some respect deserved the accusation that it was socialistic. But the New Deal's organization of the economy was aimed mainly at stabilizing the economy, and secondly, at giving enough help to the lower classes to keep them from turning a rebellion into a real revolution. The rebellion was real when Roosevelt took office. Desperate people were not waiting for the government to help them. They were helping themselves, acting directly. Aunt Molly Jackson, a woman who later became active in labor struggles in Appalachia, recalled how she walked into the local store, asked for a 24-pound sack of flour, gave it to her little boy to take it outside, then filled a sack of sugar and said to the storekeeper, "Well, I'll see you in 90 days. I have to feed some children. I'll pay you, don't worry." And when he objected, she pulled out her pistol, which as a midwife traveling alone through the hills she had a permit to carry, and said, "Martin, if you try to take this grub away from me, God knows that if they electrocute me for it tomorrow, I'll shoot you 6 times in a minute." Wow. Then, as she recalls, "I walked out. I got home and these 7 children was so hungry that they was a grabbing the raw dough off of their mother's hands and cramming it into their mouths and swallowing it whole." All over the country, people organized spontaneously to stop evictions. In New York, in Chicago, and other cities, when word spread that someone was being evicted, a crowd would gather. The police would remove the furniture from the home, put it out in the street, and the crowd would bring the furniture back. Nice. The Communist Party was active in organizing workers' alliance groups in the cities. Mrs. Willie Jeffries, a black woman, told Studs Terkel about evictions. "A lot of them was put out. They'd call and have the bailiffs come and sit them out, and as soon as they'd leave, we would put them back where they came out. All we had to do was call Brother Hilton. 'Look, such and such a place, there's a family sitting out there.' Everybody passed through the neighborhood was a member of the Workers' Alliance, had one person they would call. When that one person came, he'd have about 50 people with him. Take that stuff right on back up there. The men would connect those lights and go to the hardware and get gas pipe and connect that stove back. Put the furniture back just like you had it, so it don't look like you've been out the door." Unemployed councils were formed all over the country. They were described by Charles R. Walker, writing in the Forum in 1932. "I find it is no secret that communists organize unemployed councils in most cities and usually lead them, but the councils are organized democratically and the majority rules. In one I visited at Lincoln Park, Michigan, there were 300 members, of which 11 were communists." That's not a huge ratio. "The council had a right wing, a left wing, and a center. The chairman of the council was also the local commander of the American Legion. In Chicago, there are 45 branches of the Unemployed Council with a total membership of 22,000. The council's weapon is democratic force of numbers, and their function is to prevent evictions of the destitute, or if evicted, to bring pressure to bear on the Relief Commission to find a new home. If an unemployed worker has his gas or his water turned off because he can't pay for it, to see the proper authorities to see that the unemployed who are shoeless and clothesless get both, to eliminate through publicity and pressure discriminations between Negroes and white persons or against the foreign-born in matters of relief, to march people down to relief headquarters and demand they be fed and clothed. Finally, to provide legal defense for all unemployed arrested for joining parades, hunger marches, or attending union meetings." People organized to help themselves since business and government were not helping them in 1931 and 1932. In Seattle, the Fishermen's Union caught fish and exchanged them with people who picked fruit and vegetables, and those who cut wood exchanged that. There were 22 locals, each with a commissary, where food and firewood were exchanged for other goods and services. Barbers, seamstresses, and doctors gave of their skills in return for other things. By the end of 1932, there were 330 self-help organizations in 37 states with over 300,000 members. By early 1933, they seemed to have collapsed. They were attempting too big a job in an economy that was more and more a shambles. Perhaps the most remarkable example of self-help took place in the coal district of Pennsylvania, where teams of unemployed miners dug small mines on company property, mined coal, trucked it to cities, and sold it below the commercial rate. By 1934, 5 million tons of this bootleg coal were produced by 20,000 men using 4,000 vehicles. When attempts were made to prosecute, local juries would not convict. Local jailers would not imprison. These were simple actions taken out of practical need, but they had revolutionary possibilities. Paul Mattick, a Marxist writer, commented, "All that is really necessary for the workers to do in order to end their miseries is to perform such simple things as to take from where there is, without regard to established property principles or social philosophies, and to start to produce for themselves. Done on a broad social scale, it will lead to lasting results. On a local, isolated plane, it will be defeated. The bootleg miners have shown in a rather clear and impressive way that the so much bewailed absence of a socialist ideology on the part of the workers really does not prevent workers from acting quite capitalistically. Quite in accordance with their own needs, breaking through the confines of private property in order to live up to their own necessities. The miners' action is at the same time a manifestation of the most important part of class consciousness, namely that the problems of the workers can be solved only by themselves." It sounds like a good time and people doing, positive things, but times were bad. Like, I'm trying not to swear, but crap was bad. Like, this didn't come about because, it had to be really bad for it to come to this, you know what I'm saying? This is the Great Depression. This is it. Were the New Dealers, Roosevelt and his advisors, the businessmen who supported him, also class conscious? Did they understand that measures must be quickly taken in 1934 and 1933 and 1934 to give jobs, food baskets, relief, to wipe out the idea that the problems of the workers can be solved only by themselves? Perhaps, like the workers' class consciousness, it was a set of actions arising not from held theory, but from instinctive practical necessity. Let's not forget that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, as great a president as he was, and the New Deal is awesome, he came from a very wealthy family. He's got money. Perhaps it was such a consciousness that led to the Wagner-Connery Bill, introduced in Congress in early 1934 to regulate labor disputes. The bill provided elections for union representation, a board to settle problems and handle grievances. Was this not exactly the kind of legislation to do away with the idea that the problems of the workers can be solved only by themselves? Big business thought it was too helpful to labor and opposed it. Roosevelt was cool to it. But in the year 1934, and that doesn't mean he was cool with it. That means he was not so excited. But in the year 1934, a series of labor outbursts suggested the need for legislative action. 1.5 million workers in different industries went on strike in 1934. That spring and summer, longshoremen on the West Coast, in a rank-and-file insurrection against their own union leadership as well as against the shippers, held a convention, demanded the abolition of the Chpt, a kind of early morning slave market where work gangs were chosen for the day, and went out on strike. early morning slave market in 1934. It's an interesting way to put it. 2,000 miles of Pacific coastline were quickly tied up. The Teamsters cooperated, refusing to truck cargo to the piers, and maritime workers joined the strike. When the police moved in to open the piers, the strikers resisted en masse, and 2 were killed by police gunfire. A mass funeral procession for the strikers brought together tens of thousands of supporters, and then a general strike was called in San Francisco with 130,000 workers out, the city immobilized. 500 special police were sworn in, and 4,500 National Guardsmen assembled, with infantry, machine gun, tank, and artillery units. The Los Angeles Times wrote, "The situation in San Francisco is not correctly described by the phrase general strike. What is actually in progress there is an insurrection, a communist-inspired and led revolt against organized government. There is but one thing to be done: put down the revolt with any force necessary." This is scary stuff. The pressure became too strong. There were the troops. There was the AFL pushing to end the strike. The longshoremen accepted a compromise settlement, but they had shown the potential of a general strike. That same summer of 1934, a strike of Teamsters in Minneapolis was supported by other working people, and soon nothing was moving in the city except milk, ice, and coal trucks given exemptions by the strikers. Farmers drove their products into town and sold them directly to the people in the city. The police attacked and 2 strikers were killed. 50,000 people attended a mass funeral. There was an enormous protest meeting and a march on City Hall. After a month, the employers gave in to the Teamsters' demands. In the fall of that same year, 1934, came the largest strike of all. 325,000 textile workers in the South. They left the mills and set up flying squadrons in trucks and autos to move through the strike areas, picketing, battling guards, entering the mills, unbelting machinery. Here too, as in other cases, the strike impetus came from the rank and file against a reluctant union leadership at the top. The New York Times said, "The grave danger of the situation is that it will get completely out of the hands of the leaders." Again, the machinery of the state was set in motion. Deputies and armed strikebreakers in South Carolina fired on pickets, killing 7, wounding 20 others. But the strike was spreading in New England. In Lowell, Massachusetts, 2,500 textile workers rioted. In Salesville, Rhode Island, a crowd of 5,000 people defied state troopers who were armed with machine guns and shut down the textile mill. In Woonsocket, Rhode Island, 2,000 people aroused because someone had been shot and killed by the National Guard, stormed through the town and closed the mill. By September 18th, 421,000 textile workers were on strike throughout the country. There were mass arrests, organizers were beaten, and the death toll rose to 13. Roosevelt now stepped in and set up a board of mediation. Roosevelt now stepped in and set up a board of mediation, and the union called off the strike. In the rural South, too, organizing took place, often stimulated by communists, but nourished by the grievances of poor whites and blacks who were tenant farmers or farm laborers, always in economic difficulties, but hit even harder by the Depression. The Southern Tenant Farmers Union started in Arkansas with black and white sharecroppers and spread to other areas. Roosevelt's AAA was not helping the poorest of farmers. In fact, by encouraging farmers to plant less, it forced tenants and sharecroppers to leave the land. By 1935, of 6,800,000 farmers, 2,800,000 were tenants. The average income of a sharecropper was $312 a year. Farm laborers, and we have nothing to compare that with, because we know that the value of a dollar was different than it is now. There's nothing to tell you whether $312 a year was substantial, but judging by what he's saying about their poverty, you gotta guess that it's not. Farm laborers, moving from farm to farm, area to area, no land of their own, in 1933 were earning about $300 a year. I do kind of wish there was something here to compare it to. Black farmers were the worst off, and some were attracted to the strangers who began appearing in their area during the Depression, suggesting they organize. Nate Shaw recalls in Theodore Rosengarten's remarkable interview, and during of the pressure years, a union began to operate in this country, called it the Sharecroppers Union. That was a nice name, I thought. And I knowed what was going on was a turnabout on the Southern man, white and colored. It was something unusual. And I heard about it being a organization for the poor class of people. That's just what I wanted to get into, too. I wanted to know the secrets of it enough that I could become in the knowledge of it. Max Sloan, white man, said, "You stay out of it. These N-words running around here carrying on some kind of meeting. You better stay out of it." I said to myself, "You a fool if you think you can keep me from joining." I went right on and joined it just as quick as the next meeting come, and he done just the thing to push me into it, give me orders not to join. The teachers of this organization began to drive through this country. They couldn't let what they was doing be known. One of them was a colored fella. I disremember his name, but he did a whole lot of time holding meetings with us. That was part of this job. Had the meetings at our houses or anywhere we could keep a look and a watch out that nobody was coming in on us. Small meetings. Sometimes there would be a dozen. N-words was scared. N-words was scared. That's telling the truth. Nate Shaw told us of what happened when a black farmer who hadn't paid his debts was about to be dispossessed. The deputy said, "I'm going to take all of old Virgil Jones got this morning." I begged him not to do it. Begged him. "You'll dispossess him of being able to feed his family." Nate Shaw then told the deputy he was not going to allow it. The deputy came back with more men, and one of them shot and wounded Shaw, who then got his gun and fired back. He was arrested in late 1932 and served 12 years in an Alabama prison. His story is a tiny piece of the great unrecorded drama of the Southern poor in those years of the Sharecroppers Union. Years after his release from prison, Nate Shaw spoke his mind on color and class. "Oh, it's plain as your hand. The poor white man and the poor black man is sitting in the same saddle today. Big dudes done branched them off that way. The control of a man, the control and power, is in the hands of the rich man. That class is standing together and the poor white man is out there on the colored list. I've caught that. Ways and actions a heap of times speaks louder than words." And let's end the episode there. So yeah. Hopefully you'll join me in the next episode. Hopefully you enjoyed what you heard. And I do appreciate you tuning in. Hope we'll see you next time. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. Like and subscribe. Subscribe and like. Notification bell. Don't forget the notification bell. When I make the next part, you'll be notified. Thanks for tuning in. See ya.